Due to copyright, I can't publish many audiobooks on YouTube. At our audiobook novel service, we offer access to over 300 full novels from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, Wuxia, and more, all in high-quality audio format. Each novel is available with a one-time payment only. No subscriptions, no monthly payment, and no ads. Payments via PayPal or Ko-fi. To browse the full list of available novels, message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out our full catalog on Discord. Chapter 161. The Messiah. They all stood apart from each other. Hao had managed to pull himself up, but he was still so stunned by the shock of what he had just witnessed that his hands were trembling. Ellis, on the other hand, his face was buried in his palm, his thoughts in utter disarray. Damn, just what is this guy? How can he copy someone's talent ability? It made no sense to Ellis. Talent abilities were not something that could be replicated so effortlessly. They were deeply rooted in the drifter's soul core. They originated from that point as talents. Therefore, what was always observed was merely an extended manifestation of the talent ingrained in a drifter's soul core. He had never heard or seen someone who could flawlessly mimic this extended manifestation. Just when I think he's out of surprises, he shocks me again. Dark Terror, a clone using a rift monster as a pet. I honestly don't know what to think anymore. Just kill me at this point. Ellis was certain Northern harbored many secrets. He didn't know what the guy's talent was, but he was sure it was one hell of a complicated one. Because it defied logic how someone could be so formidable. It simply made no sense. It didn't make any sense, and not being able to unravel the reason left his entire being utterly frustrated. Finally, with those trembling hands, Hao pointed at Northern, his voice quivering as he asked, Hao? How are you able to do that? Northern scoffed and smiled. It's a long story, really, but it has something to do with my attribute. You wouldn't even understand if I told you about it. Hao's face crumpled with horror. Northern looked so casual about it. This should infuriate him, but instead, it filled him with profound fear. It was as if the pieces were beginning to fall into place in his head. First, he can withstand my strikes, and he can copy my talent ability? Has he finally been sent to us? The one that will deliver us from this predicament we find ourselves in. Hao believed in a prophecy, although many had forgotten. He was one of the few natives that still clung to such beliefs. The last oracle before Terence uttered her last words, and it said, A time shall come, and a Messiah shall be sent, a being cloaked in dark and devilish carapace. They will hold the reins of destruction and ride on fate like a gale of wind. Of course, at first it made little sense, but to them, they saw it as the coming of the one who would liberate the Dark Continent. It was first believed to be the last prince of Lothelowin. He too had donned dark armor. But he never succeeded. Years and years passed, and no Messiah in dark carapace arrived. He was growing old and had given up on the prophecy. Instead, he focused solely on surviving to the best of his ability. Although this man was not wearing a dark carapace, his uniqueness and strength tempted Hao to believe he might be the one the prophecy spoke of, that he is their Messiah. Because, even among the party leaders, he had not encountered someone who could impress him so profoundly. Well, except that girl. But she's a girl. Hao tended to favor masculinity over femininity. Yeah, he was that kind of person. After the whole idea settled in his mind, he sighed and calmed down a little. Then he spoke. Who are ya, and why are you here? Ah! Finally! Ellis exclaimed. He bowed once again to Hao and spoke. My friend and I have come to. I wasn't talking to you. Hao cut him off before he could finish and turned his eyes to Northern. I'm talking to you. Who are you, and why are you here? Northern looked at Ellis with an arched brow. The latter nodded his head. Then Northern bowed towards the short man and responded with his gruff voice. My friend and I have come to see the auction house. Hao's brows drifted upwards slightly. Oh, is that so? Northern nodded. Yes, sir. Hao raised a brow. He sounds respectful now. What was all that about earlier? He was tempted to ask but chose not to. Instead, he responded to Northern, saying, I hope you came with a lot of soul cores. Northern looked at Ellis, who immediately stepped closer and joined their conversation. We are here for the item exchange section. Hal placed his hands on his waist. Item exchange, eh? He moved one hand away and began to caress his short beard. Then I suppose you came with a lot of items in your souls. His face was stony and square, his eyes firm and grinning, and his hair brunette-colored and braided to the back, the sides left bald like a typical Viking. Oh yes sir, we do. A lot? Ellis answered, beaming with a cute and innocent grin. He nodded happily at Northern as the man turned and led them into the tower. Hal said as he opened the door, "Since you're going to the auction house, we're going down, not up." He entered, then began stomping the ground. "Ha! The heavy tremors are gone," Northern noted. After a while of stomping, Hal exclaimed softly, "Found ya!" He bent and dusted the sands and debris off its surface, grabbed a handle, and pulled it up. There was the door that led them down. Behind it were whirling stairs. He turned to look at them and glanced at the stairs. "The auction house is down there." "Ah, I see." Northern nodded slowly. "What are you waiting for? Move them skinny legs." Immediately he shouted, and Northern and Ellis hastily entered into the ground. Then Ellis followed. They took the stairs down, then met another metallic door. Hal walked to the gate and crouched. He grabbed the door. There were marks of being gripped on it. So all he needed to do was place his grip in those carved marks, and slowly, with a powerful and strained groan, began to lift the door up. Chapter 162. Looming Trouble. As the thick metal door slowly rose with Hal's straining groan, a cavernous space opened up to them. With all his strength, Hal threw the door up, causing the entire place to tremble violently. Northern, startled, looked up and looked at Hal. "What? You got a problem with me?" Northern shook his head with a forced smile. "Aha! Not really. Just the door. It won't fall on your head, so move," he exclaimed, prompting Northern and Ellis to trudge into the space before them, albeit with extreme caution and persistent looking up. As Northern and Ellis walked inside, they were greeted by the high vaulted ceiling supported by thick, weathered pillars that seemed to groan under the weight above. The floor was uneven, cracked flagstones jutting up at odd angles, creating treacherous footing. Weak beams of light filtered in through high, arched windows, coated in a thick layer of grime and cobwebs. The air was thick with the scent of mold and the faint, unidentifiable odors of goods long forgotten. Rows of rickety wooden benches faced a raised dais at the far end, its surface scarred and stained from years of abandonment. Behind it hung a tattered, once opulent curtain, now faded and threadbare. Hal led them through the curtain. Behind it were stacked wooden boxes and closed barrels. He stopped and turned to them. "I will ask clearly, and you better not be joking with me. You got serious items you can sell?" he asked with a frown. Ellis's face contorted into a likewise expression. "We wouldn't have come this far if we weren't serious," he responded. "Fine." Hal turned and easily carried a wooden box that seemed to be twice his size. He dropped the wooden box on the ground and turned to the next. Like that he began to unstack them. When he was done, he turned to Northern and Ellis, dusted his hand and said, "Here we have armors and charm items. You won't find much that are interesting, but should anything catch you eyes you can let me know." Northern folded his hands, looked inspectively at the boxes before turning to Hal. "I don't understand something." Hal shifted his gaze to the person speaking. Northern continued, "Are these really items?" Hal scowled at him immediately. "What? You doubting my junity?" "No, it's not that. I'm just thinking, don't items usually return to the soul? These seems like they have been here for a long time." Hal stared squarely at him for a couple of seconds, then heaved a sigh. "Seriously, this kid, you don't know anything, do ya?" Ellis exhaled too. He turned to Northern. "There are varieties of items and their uses. Really, we can't just begin to fathom how much they can do. So it shouldn't be really surprising that these items can stay out of the soul for a long time." He turned to Hal, although I suspect that he likely has another item that is making that possible. How smiled. Looks like this one is sharp-witted. He slapped his hand on one of the boxes. It's the wooden boxes. There are two types of item, in case you don't know, bound and unbound. Bound are items that are of course tied to your soul. Those ones can sit right in your soul. There are also unbound items. These ones only stay outside your soul, however. Regardless of your location, they can always appear to ya the moment ya will it so. How folded his hands. I'm shocked that you don't know when you are carrying an unbound item around. Northern raised his brows. Huh? Me? Where? That cross bag on ya. Northern held the bag. This? What you think? That's a bottomless bag, ain't? What price you willing to have for it? I can give you something good. Nope, this is not for sale? But are you serious? This is an unbound item. How scoffed. Look at this guy. What you think it is? Some ordinary bag? Stupid. Northern frowned slightly. I don't really like being called stupid, but I guess I deserved it. I didn't really think about it like that. Damn it. There's so much I don't know. I feel so stupid even. Howe turned his head to Ellis. So what you giving me? Be quick, these darn party leaders on the edge, damn curfew. Can't have customers stay around long. Ellis raised his brow. He was more interested in what the man had just uttered than the items they were about to trade. A curfew? He inquired. Howe looked at him silently for a couple of seconds. What? You didn't hear? Where the hell y'all live? Everybody in this castle knows about the curfew. Ellis bowed with a sheepish smile. I'm sorry, we stay around the main city. We don't know much going around here. But please can you explain to us? Northern didn't mind what was being said and just inquisitively looked around. Well, the party leaders declared a curfew a couple of days ago. Some rude boys claim they saw a monster with 4 eyes. At that point Northern froze and slowly looked away. Ellis's face contorted seriously. A monster? 4 eyes? What exactly is that? What else? He glared at Ellis. Those darn party leaders think a monster has entered the city. They all being alert because there's no telling when it will come again. They even raised a curfew and the security is now tight. Ellis slowly nodded his head. I see. He smiled. Well then, can we proceed with the trade? I think we need to leave as soon as we can. Northern nodded too. Vigorously, like he said. We don't want to let the curfew catch us here. So let's be snappy about it. Howe looked at Northern, then looked at Ellis. Then he sighed. Well, it's all ya. Choose whatever catches your eyes and I'll give you. Suddenly the man paused. Northern and Ellis first looked at each other, then turned their gazes to Howe. Sorry? Is something wrong? Ellis asked politely. Howe looked at him with narrowed eyes. Some damn person knocking on my door. I'll go check. You two wait here. He said to them and turned away, not giving them a second to object. Both of them turned to each other. Ellis's face turned pale. Northern had a breaking smile. Looks like some trouble has happened. What do we do? Ellis frustratingly rubbed his face. I don't even know. First we have to leave this place safely and not get dragged into all this nonsense. I see. We can leave immediately after we are done here. Northern insinuated. And Ellis nodded, agreeing to it. Meanwhile, at the door, a green-haired man with green armor and 2 dark-skinned dudes behind him was standing in front of Howe, with a polite but somewhat crude smile plastered on his face. He slowly opened his mouth and asked, I'm sorry to disturb you. We've been looking for a guy named Ellis, his slender, with a black hair and timid eyes. I hear he was sighted around here with a white-haired guy. Chapter 163. The Green-Haired Man. Howe stood in front of the green-haired man, a scowl darkening his features. You got some balls coming to my face. The green-haired man smiled politely, his eyes closed. As I have said, we came here in search of a boy named Ellis. You should know him very well. After all, you were so driven mad by that incident that you wanted the party leaders to banish the culprits. Howe raised his head slightly, his scowl deepening. Speak in clear terms. His voice carried a hint of confusion, although Howe appeared reluctant to show it. But the man speaking before him was tremendously observant and could detect even the slightest twitches on Hao's face. After all, this incident he spoke of was one that had left Hao utterly angered and displeased with the party leaders. The man exuded a soothing smile and parted his lips to continue. As you know, there is a monster threat occurring in the castle. The testimonies were given by my men, and they claim this guy Ellis was also there. However, the problem is that he is nowhere to be found. We concluded that he had been eaten by the monster and sought to thoroughly search for his body. However, a couple of minutes ago, I happened to be at the outskirts when someone came rushing to me, stating they saw him come here with some white-haired individual. The man looked at Hao, straight into his eyes, slightly opening them. And there's only one person who has white hair among us. Hao folded his arms, as much as he could confirm the validity of what the man, or perhaps even a boy before him was saying. He didn't want to admit it and reveal his customers. That didn't align with business practices, and it didn't sound like they were suspects of any wrongdoing. But he still couldn't shake this feeling of discomfort. Perhaps it was because the person dealing with this situation was this particular individual. Hao had crossed paths with him more than once, and he wasn't proud to admit that he had completely fallen into his traps every time. Who knows what this bastard is planning again? And he was unreasonably skilled at tricks and deception, which made the sweet smile on his face infuriating to Hao. You keep spitting this and that, but I don't see any point you trying to make. What you want me to do exactly? Hao? The voice came out curt and stern. Just tell us. Is he, or is he not, with you? He is not. Hao gave an immediate response. A smile wavered upon the man's face. In fact, he looked like his lips were twitching, as if he was struggling to smile. He rubbed his mouth with his hand, then raised his green eyes to the sky for a moment before returning them to meet Hao's gaze. You know, I really tried to be reasonable with you, he said and gestured with his hand. Push him away from the door. Permit me to force my way in, Hao. I don't believe you at all. Both dark-skinned men rushed to the front to apprehend Hao. POW. POW. But immediately, a crunching blow slugged into their midsection, throwing them away like ragdolls. Hao's movement had been so swift that the green-haired man almost missed it. Apart from having an impressive talent, Hao was also the kind of person that never neglected training and the utilization of techniques such as stance, footwork, and body composure. He was an exceptional fighter overall. And a traitor too. A particularly formidable one to deal with at that. Of course, he uttered while casting a pitiful gaze at the view of his fallen subordinates. Then his gaze returned blankly to Hao. I knew you're strong. I just didn't expect you to resist. Now, I have evidence that you're harboring someone who could have tricked us all. He feigned his death and made us all think he was killed by a monster, used an illusion on my subordinates and made them think they saw something, all so that he could run away with my items. He sighed audibly. Such a pity, Hao. Did you put him up to this after discovering that he was one of the individuals who stole from you? You threatened him to get back at me? All you had were accusations. There was no evidence that I made people steal from you, and you still carry that grudge. Hao's face contorted into a grimace of displeasure. The words the man was uttering began to irk him in more than one way. But the prominent one was the fact that this said individual they were looking for was one of the individuals who stole from him. Of course, there were other annoying factors, such as this man still clinging to his innocence even when the facts were laid before him. And now he was throwing all sorts of accusations. It was infuriating. He was infuriating, and Hao hated him with every fiber of his being. But this entire situation had become utterly disturbing for him too. First of all, there was a thief he had missed, and right now that thief was in his home of treasures. Although before, they had tricked him, so he was somewhat confident that they couldn't steal anything. The items would simply return whenever he summoned them. And he kept a list of the things he owned. But he still needed to go inside. However, the thought of letting this man have his way was more displeasing to Hao. He looked up into the man's eyes. You sly snake. You are not going to enter my place. His eyes widened for a moment, then creased back. Hal was ready. He was standing with instinctive caution, with his hands fisted, ready to lash out at any moment. The green-haired man observed him for a couple of minutes. "I see you are ready to take me on," he intoned with a grin. "Anything to keep you away from my abode," Hal responded curtly. Tension wafted through the air between the two of them. Then the green-haired man, Graham, blew out a breath forcefully and shot forward. Chapter 164. Who is the definition of hell? Graham shot forward, one hand in front of him, the other behind him. As he closed the distance between him and Hal, he lashed the hand behind forward, swinging swiftly with a silver aesthetic stiletto. Hal immediately backstepped, obtaining a shallow line cut on his cheek. He crouched and shot forward like a spring, aiming for Graham's crotch. But Graham was quick-witted. His eyes widened in that mini-moment. The detriment of what was going to happen to his reproductive organ flashed before his eyes in milliseconds, and all his instincts worked together to counter the situation. In the midst of the rush of action, Graham staggered backward. That at least saved him from Hal's incoming attack, but his instincts had at the same time already executed a counter, which means his knee, as he staggered back, rose powerfully, hitting Hal in his groin. A sickening crunching sound exploded air out of Hal's back. He felt his entire body shiver from the pain that traveled across in an instant. His legs trembled, and he succumbed to his knees slowly. Graham exhaled sharply and blew his front hairs upward with an oof. Then he combed through them with his hand and looked down at Hal, who was holding his belly and writhing in pain. "Ah, damn it! I can't believe my heart," faltered there for a moment. He wiped his forehead. "I even sweated? You really tried, Hal." He dashed a kick onto Hal's flank, causing him to groan even harder and roll away. A thick frown crumbled Graham's face. It was as if whatever was piling up behind those sweet smiles of his were now bursting out. And they were pretty ugly. The short fight that had played out between them was not something Graham should have won at all. At least not this early. What just happened was a coincidence. Luck worked in Graham's favor. And now it made Hal look like he wasn't all that. But make no mistake, Hal is a very strong drifter, respected even by Gilbert. He had stuff too. Graham angrily stomped towards him. He was at this point trying to get up, but his legs were still trembling. He looked up at Graham with a strained glare, his brows darkly furrowed. "This brat." Graham raised his chin. What is it with that look? Have you not yet learned your place?" His legs swung past Hal's face, causing the man's head to throw away in a likewise direction. He opened his palm, revealing a black seed. Then he closed it again and threw his hand backward. As his hand shot forward, a green vine exploded out of his fist, wriggling like the abandoned tail of a reptile. Before the vine lash could make its mark on Hal's body, Graham's hand stopped midair. A frown leaked from Graham's face as he saw the person that was holding his hand. Behind the white-haired dude holding his hand was a black-haired boy, shivering. He jerked his hand away from Northern's grip and turned around. "You finally decide to show your face, you filthy criminal." Northern moved a little, blocking Graham's view. Graham contorted his features even more darkly and commanded, "Move away from my front." Northern cocked his head in response. "Why should I? Stranger, know your place. I don't have any dispute with you. I best advise you that it'll be best for you to move out of my face before I show you dread." Northern's eyes grew wide as he heard Graham's statement. They resonated inside his thoughts. Dread. Northern first frowned. Then one of his brows drove slightly upward. "Dread." Graham raised his chin. "It looks like you think yourself to be something since you've been the center of attraction for a couple of days. I can bring you the most hellish experience of your life. I can make you regret the moment you met me and dared to hold my hand with those filthy mitts." A grin stretched Northern's lips. He was first smiling, but the more he thought about it, the more funny it sounded, that Northern couldn't help but burst out in a wild laughter. He put his hand forward, laughed and laughed, leaned on a knee while laughing. "Oh, crap, crap, crap." He slowly rose and tapped Graham's shoulder as his laughter came to a galloping end. You bro. You are full of jokes. Such ridiculous jokes. Graham's brow furrowed deeply. Take those filthy mitts off my shoulders. Northern immediately held Graham's shoulder, gripping him and staring into his face. His facial features slowly transitioned from leftover front of laughter to a grim scowl that made his blue eyes glow with monstrous flare. I said. Graham stopped mid-sentence. He tried to move but could feel Northern's grip on his green armor getting tighter. And shamefully, it was beginning to hurt. Get your... Cracks delved into the armor from the point Northern was gripping. His lips began to tremble, and eyes blinked as the pain registered through his entire being. He gritted his teeth and resisted the torturous ache that tormented his shoulder and caused his entire being to respond in cold fear. He could feel his blood almost freezing. His legs were trembling, but he was trying so hard not to give in to their feebleness. All his muscles were screaming in protest to the overwhelming threat that gripped their fibers. At this point, Graham couldn't say a word again. He was gritting his teeth, trying to move but couldn't. What is this? What is this pressure? What is this strength? His mind screamed for answers. Northern looked intensely at him and squinted his eyes. Then he said, You see, the kind of people that I hate the most are the kind of people like you, people who don't know their place. He paused and looked over at Hao, who was already standing, caution plastered to his face. Because you don't know your place, you think you can march an older person anyhow. He threw a glance at Ellis and continued, spacing his words with palpable confidence. Because you don't know your place, you think you can cheat anyone. Then his face twisted into a deep sea of horror. As Graham beheld them, it was like he was looking into the abyss. It was filled with void and chaos. There was so much pandemonium burning through his eyes. Confidently, Northern's words rolled out again. Because you don't know your place. You dare think you. He cast a disgusted look on him. You can show me dread? You can show me hell. A wicked laughter escaped Northern's lips for a short moment. Then he abandoned Graham's shoulder, swiftly grabbing his neck before he could move an inch. Northern slowly drew him closer to his face. Then the wicked grin returned. Look at me, human. I am dread. I am your definition of hell.
Chapter 165, à Plaisance surprise.
A couple of minutes ago, Northern and Ellis kept searching. The moment Hal left them to attend to the person at the door, Ellis began to freak out. Whatever was happening in the city due to the appearance of a monster, he was sure it was the event of dark terror. And most likely they'd be looking for him too. After all, he was the only person from the party that was missing. If they were looking for him, that means undoubtedly that man too was out searching for him. This was his perfect excuse to get to Ellis. To have Ellis completely and destroy his life for daring to disobey him. Ellis, in that moment, felt like everything he had tried to do in the while all of a sudden became useless. He felt weak in the legs. The thought of being captured and tortured plagued him with so much cold fear. Please, Sir Northern. You promised to help me, remember? His voice shook. Northern looked at the boy and felt so sad for him. His face was so disheveled, broken apart by intense fear. Northern stared at Ellis for a while, his eyes picturing the fear on his face. It was somewhat beautiful. Northern thought, how powerful is the person to make him cower so much? And again he thought, man, I'd sure like to recreate this kind of fear on the face of that person. A smile slowly curled up his face while his eyes still stayed glued to Ellis's. He touched the boy's shoulder and said to him, Ellis, I have decided not to run away. I must recreate this. Ellis's countenance shattered even further. His brows drifted up, and his lips trembled as he spoke. What do you mean? You promised. Exactly, Ellis, and I am about to fulfill my promise to you. I will beat that guy to a pulp for your sake. A villainous grin slowly crept on Northern's lips. His shoulders shuddered as a silent laughter escaped his lips. He tapped Ellis's shoulder again, twice in a row. Then he turned around and demanded of him, Follow me. Ellis first stood in a few seconds of silence. He felt his throat grow dry. He tried to muster some spit and swallowed it, then hurried after Northern, who was already reaching the entrance. They trudged up the stairs for a couple of minutes before they finally got to the door and opened it. What Northern saw, however, immediately caused something to begin boiling within him. A green-haired guy was kicking the man that they had all come here to exchange items with. Seeing this immediately caused a grim anger to dawn on his face, even though his eyes were plain and almost emotionless, which hinted at an even more dangerous facade. "Hey, Ellis. It's that bastard, right?" Ellis shook his head. His hands were trembling, but he tried to hide them behind his back. He knew Northern was strong and powerful, but this person had instilled so much horror and fear within his bones that it had become an instinctive reaction to cower before his presence. It was how disastrous and strong of a person he was. However, the more Northern saw this, the more he wanted to repaint it on the face of this person. And seeing how much of a nuisance and stupid person he is, Northern was glad he was not going to be doing the wrong thing. Northern inhaled and exhaled steamy breath through his mouth. In a flash, he covered the distance, his legs barely touching the ground. As Braham swung his arm back and created a vine lash, Northern appeared behind him, and Braham didn't even notice. He had ample time to strike down the stupid fellow. But he decided in that instance, "Let's do this slow and painful." As Braham's hand swung forward, the vine lashing out in a frenzied dance, Northern caught it mid-air, causing Braham to look back at him. Back to this moment, Braham Lockson. Braham was a distinguished individual. By class alone, he was placed on a pedestal far above a lot of people. He was one of the very few among the students who were true nobles. Not just his class, he was strong and talented, different from many among his peers. Green pretty hair and eyes, when he awakened an impressive talent that further rose his pride, the pride of his parents, and people's expectation of him. And thus, he had grown up shouldering so much pride and expectation. And so he had never in his entire life lived a moment where he dared to consider anyone higher than himself. Even when he got accidentally brought to the Dark Continent, Braham was one of the very few persons that adapted quickly to the change of things. He was just that intelligent and talented, unfearful and brave in every possible way. He recognized people's strength but was never intimidated by them. However, for the first time in his entire life, he stood before someone he thought so little of, and a terrifying notion crossed his mind. He's strong. Damn. He's strong. Braham felt absolutely powerless as Northern's grip tightened around his neck. The hollow sea of horror that reflected on his face sent so much cold fear into Braham's system. It made him tremble involuntarily. He had never cowered like this before. He had never in his entire life been so scared. An ear-to-ear grin adorned Northern's face as he saw the guy's face crumble with intense fear. He slowly tried to open his trembling lips and after a few trials managed to murmur, please. SP. Me. Northern turned his ear to the guy's mouth. Huh? I don't think I heard what you said. Braham pressed his lips together, hesitating before he tried to open them again. However, he suddenly stopped and weakly looked back. Then a small smile slowly graced his lips. At that point, Northern felt very disturbed. This bastard. His eyes suddenly widened. Crap! How did I miss it? He immediately released his grip on Braham and delivered a powerful slap to his chest, causing him to fly away and crash into a nearby tree. Then he swiftly turned, beholding the person standing behind him, with a couple of others. A forced grin graced a corner of his lips. We finally meet again. I didn't know we'd be meeting so soon. He, in fact, thought they'd be meeting sooner, because she had said she would get back to him. However, this meeting of theirs didn't look like it was going to be a friendly one. She was, after all, standing with her sword unsheathed. So, to what do I owe this pleasant surprise? Chapter 166. Decisive Moment.
Appeasante surprise.
Raven tilted her head a little bit. That should be my line. To what do I owe this pleasant surprise? She said coldly. Then she looked at the sight of Braham fallen at the base of the tree and slowly added, "You also attacked one of my mates." A small frown touched her brows. It didn't last a second before her face returned to its usual cold state. "Your mate here attacked an elderly person." Raven looked intensely at him. "I didn't take you to be a defender of morality." Northern chuckled fakely and waved his hand. Nah, I am not all that. I just wanted to recreate something and not feel bad for doing so. And he happened to give me a justifiable excuse as to why I could carry on with my experiment." Raven looked away for a moment, taking her eyes to Braham, and she brought them back to Northern. "I suppose your experiment was a success?" Northern looked back at the fallen green-haired guy, then returned his eyes to Raven. "Well, this was not the result, but yes, it was." Raven slowly raised her blade to his neck. "You are under arrest for unreasonable assault." She turned her eyes to Ellis. "And you too. You're coming with me. The entire stronghold thinks you are dead." Perhaps Braham was right. You must have an illusion ability, and that you cast it on these guys so you could escape your sins. Raven's words all came with the highest level of coldness. There was no emotion behind her tone. It was plain and bland. Behind her were several drifters who were in different armors and holding different weapons. Northern didn't notice Terrence, but he noticed a tall boy with dark hair, dark emotionless eyes, and pale, in fact almost white skin. "I guess I have to take on all of them, huh? Don't think about fighting your way through this?" Raven said at that moment, as if she could read his mind. She didn't need to be able to read his mind. She could tell with his slight shift in composure that he was up to something, and her evaluation of him was that he was probably strong enough to take on everyone here. But she was equally confident. "If you think you can, I'm all that is needed to stop you." Northern retracted his head with a slight frown. Her confidence is annoying. To be cautious enough, he decided to use his new talent ability. "Let's see if she has something delicious. Depending on it, I might decide to fight her." If Raven had a reasonable talent he could copy, then he was going to fight her to cause her to use her talent ability, and he copies it, then beat the crap out of them and storm out of the place. Or maybe copy it, then pause the fight to find a reasonable way to end this situation without causing too much damage. He, after all, still needed that airship. Either way, let's see. "Your rank is too low to view the profile of this individual." "Eh?" Northern slightly knitted his brows in mild confusion. Then he looked back and used the ability again. "Name, Braham Lockson. True name, Son of the Lost Tree. Attributes, Friend of Nature. Soul rank, Nomad. Soul core saturation, Full. Talent, Verdant Embrace. Talent class, S. Talent ability, Overgrowth." It worked. Crap, his abilities too look. But he was more concerned about the issue in front of him. He turned his eyes to Raven and activated C again. The same thing appeared. "Your rank is too low to view the profile of this individual." Then the reality dawned on Northern. Does this mean she's stronger than I am? The notion was unacceptable for him. None of these guys had spent so much time in hell as he had. It made no sense that there'll be one of his peers who was stronger than him. No, it can't be. It has to be the rank. That at least made a little sense. Besides, the system also said rank. That means that Raven's rank was higher than Nomad? Crap. She's a master? Northern couldn't believe it. This small girl standing before him with a firm, cold gaze is a master? The moment that realization settled in, he began to recompose himself and restructure all his plans thus far. Of course, he could still push his way through, but it became a question of whether he is ready to reveal dark terror or show these people any more of his abilities. At the very least, he knew they could do no harm to him. He loomed at Ellis for a moment. The poor guy was shivering in so much fear written on his face. Seriously, this guy is a wimp. Northern then faced Raven. "I will not fight through anything, but I intend to make a couple of things clear to you." Raven nodded and paid rapt attention to him. First of all, that guy did not cast any illusionary spell on those guys. Did you try asking your well-respected Sage Gilbert? Raven raised a brow. What do you mean? Northern's eyes widened for a moment. Then he smiled. I see. He didn't tell her about it. He looked around and saw that the white-haired girl Terence was not among them. Then he continued, Oh, well, what I'm trying to say is there is seriously a monster walking freely in your city, and I happened to save Ellis from it and brought him to my abode. Raven's brows slowly furrowed as Northern added, I don't know if you guys should be here like this caring about whether these are lies or truths. Northern grinned internally. You people leave me no choice. I'm going to use dark terror to sow great discord among you all. I'll make you rise on your toes. This moment was the start of a sentient hero in black carapace that rode on the tides of destruction and led humanity in the dark continent into an era of freedom. It was when the prophecy began to take wheel. Chapter 167. Words of a reckless brat locked in a dungeon cell. Damn, it's really dirty in here. Northern muttered with visible disgust playing across his face. The dungeon cell that held him had a murky floor. It seemed like the underground sewage system was somehow leaking, and it was penetrating the floor. This made the place filled with a terrible odor. One that made Northern want to consider breaking out of the cell. Ellis was behind him, sitting on the mattress that laid glued to the wall, his head bowed, his legs nervously tapping the ground. Northern held the rusting iron bars of the dungeon cell, stood silent for a while. It had been a couple of hours since they got here, and he had been silent. It was not like he lacked the power to break out of a cell or refuse to be arrested. Northern knew he was already not so smart with how to handle troubles like this without resorting to violence. Actually, he would have preferred violence, but he thought carefully about things. If he fought his way through this, it would only make Ellis's condition worse and make it seem like whatever Braham was proposing to them was right. He didn't know the extent of what had happened, but he could make a few guesses from the things Raven said. It's at least clear that they think Ellis used an illusionary spell on the others and tricked the entire stronghold into thinking he is dead. Northern paused his thoughts for a second and gritted his teeth, clenching tightly the iron bar.
I'm pissed.
They think my dark terror is a mere illusion. And why would they even think that when there are others that have seen him? I'm sure it's all Gilbert. That man must be playing at something. But it's infuriating that they think my dark terror is an illusion. Sir Northern. Ellis's voice, weak and waning, sounded from behind. Northern turned around with a grin, the kind you give after causing a disastrous situation by accident. You have decided to come back to life. I don't understand why you are grinning. Is there anything funny about our situation right now? Ellis projected to him with a stern tone. He drew a breath and glared at Northern. You could have fought through the crowd. We could have escaped. Northern's face contorted with pity. And then what? He breathed before his next statement. Be labeled as criminals even in a desecrated land? Northern shook his head sympathetically. I'm sure there are better ways to go about this than bulldozing our way. What I'm trying to do is permanently help your situation, not make it worse. Now, you either have to trust me, or you fear me. Which would you prefer? Northern placed his hands on his chin. Personally, I don't want you to trust me. I don't need those worthless human expenditures. I'd prefer fear. At least it'd keep you from raising your voice against me like you just did. Northern's facial expression swiftly transitioned into a blank glare. Ellis, at that moment, gulped and looked away with a drop of sweat on his head. Northern then nodded with a sweet smile and turned to his front. Oh, someone is coming, he said. Immediately sense picked up the presence, and the familiarity of the semblance that the person gave off. Northern already knew who it was. A couple of minutes later, a woman with rebellious vermilion tresses, donning a large brown coat, arrived in front of the cell that held Northern and Ellis. Annette stood in front of the cell for a couple of silent seconds before she sank her face into her palm and let out a tired sigh. She then looked at Northern in the eyes. He was smiling. You are smiling? Her brows furrowed. She clenched her fist and really wished she could hit him hard in the stomach. What do you think you are doing? Why are you in the stronghold? Why did you beat up Braham Lakson? And why are you harboring a criminal? Northern playfully waved his hand away. Don't be so worried. This matter isn't all that. Annette's features became dark. Seriously? What is wrong with you? I'm being serious. If not for anything, assaulting a party leader is equal to signing a death warrant with Raven and Gilbert. Of all people, it had to be Braham Lakson. Northern squinted his eyes, then spoke after a few beats. Something sounds very wrong with what is coming out of your mouth. You're saying the so-called party leaders, who are supposed to be the strongest around here, are being babied by Raven and Gilbert. When did I ever say that? Annette inquired. Just now. Why should there be trouble because I assaulted a party leader? If he is as strong as he claims, then we should settle the score within ourselves. If I'm able to beat up a party leader, it just means he isn't that strong. Why should that be much of a problem? Annette retracted her head a little. She placed her hands on her waist and sighed. She probably could understand the point Northern was trying to make. It was valid. She too had no reason why, but that was how it had been. Whenever anyone had troubles with the party leaders, Raven most especially took it very seriously. And right now it was the case with Northern's matter. It doesn't matter. What I'm just trying to tell you is that you're in big trouble. These guys are considering sending you out of the stronghold. Northern downturned his lips. How is that trouble? Annette's frown deepened. At this point, she felt like her brows were already aching from all the furrowing. It is a wilderness of monstrosities outside this place. Northern looked at the lady in front of him squarely and chuckled like an insane bastard. Instructor Annette, I belong to the wilderness of monstrosities. In fact, I thrive there. Annette's expression froze, then grew pale. She just didn't know what to do about this guy anymore. Why is he being so arrogant? Northern stared at her for a while before a sincere smile crawled across his face. His words sincerely rolled out. See, instructor, and I know you're worried about me, and I am genuinely grateful for it. But you don't have to be. I have everything in control. But if I were you, I'd be worried about my safety. Whatever that monster is, those guys weren't lying about it. Ellis didn't cast any illusionary spell. Annette raised her head slightly and observed Northern's face keenly. What do you mean? Northern shrugged. Who knows? Just words of a reckless brat locked in a dungeon cell. He chuckled before retreating to sit on the mattress. Chapter 168. Plights of a Drifter. I hope you really know what you are doing? You messed with Braham Lakson. That guy is a pain for even me to deal with. Northern tilted his head a little bit. What is it about that hypocrite that makes you think I am in a ditch? Annette couldn't believe the words Northern was uttering. Either he was blind to his situation, or he was simply arrogant. North boy, you are in a ditch. Can't you see where you are staying right now? Northern looked at the floor of the dungeon and wrinkled his nose. He raised his head back to meet Annette's eyes. It's only temporary. Don't worry about it. Just take care of yourself. Oh, and I think I might need information on what is going on, whatever happens from now on. Can you please help me with that, Master Annette? Northern sounded so genuine and respectful that Annette couldn't find it in herself to turn him down. She exhaled. But what would it change? Northern smiled. At this point, his face was already getting used to the smile and portraying him to be a cute little devilish thing. That will determine whether I endure staying here or I ask them to provide me another room. A more comfortable one. Annette's only brow drifted upwards. You really are a clown, aren't you? Northern shook his head dismissively. Nah. I'm not that impressive. Annette sighed again, then set her eyes on Northern with a soft sigh. If you really are set on doing whatever you are doing, then I guess I should stop worrying myself. Northern smiled. I appreciate your concern over me, but I'll be fine. You guys have a terror to deal with. She looked at him seriously for a couple of seconds. In that couple of seconds, Northern immediately tried to use Z on her. And the result? Your rank is too low to view the profile of this individual. I see. So it really doesn't work on higher ranks. Most likely because there's a 2-rank gap between the two of them. Annette is a vagrant rank, a master while he is only a drifter, which confirms the fact that Raven could also be a master. But how, in the world, is that even possible? Except if she was going around killing thousands of monsters, it made no sense that she became a master in just 6 months. Ah, crap. I'm so motivated to get stronger right now. He hated seeing that thing. Your rank is too low to view the profile of this individual. It sort of told him, hey, dude, you are still weak compared to some people. Northern doubted if he'd lose in a fight with her, but as long as this was about a master, there are variables that he'd never see coming. He has a wide arsenal of skills, and the most powerful could finish things before they even started. But that would leave him in a very chaotic state. So, unless he had a way to deal with the aftermath of using chaos, he couldn't dare to use the skill right now. So that one was out of the question. There was also using Dark Terror or taking on the Soul of Call on himself. Even if he takes on the Soul of Call, in the end, it boils down to his own level of skill and experience. Would he be able to defeat someone who rose from a drifter to a master in 6 months? And who's to say that Raven is incapable of defeating Dark Terror? She looks like big trouble, to be honest. Northern couldn't deny the strange feeling he had, that if his circumstances were given to her, she'd have come out alive, maybe even stronger than he is. He had never crossed swords with her. In fact, he didn't know her or her personality. But his intuition was incredibly cautious against her. She made him uncomfortable in all possible ways. And he didn't like it. That was why he had to go for whatever she wanted him to go for. He had to see for himself what kind of monster she is. And in order for that to happen, this situation had to be handled perfectly. Even though he was going to be sowing discord among them all, he didn't care. They looked like they already believed it. I mean, they even raised a curfew. So why not give it to them for real? Annette, after her silence, had nothing more to say to Northern. He had proven that he was going to continue being stubborn. All she could do now is help him with information as he had asked. She glared at Ellis, then drifted her eyes to Northern, who was sitting beside him. Take care of yourself. With that, she made a sharp turn and headed down to the tunnel where she came from, the sound of her footsteps echoing away. Damn, she really is a worrywart, Northern commented beneath his lips. Ellis was politely sitting with his hands on his thighs. Northern's statement of fearing him continued to bug his mind. Was he offended that I spoke like that? Will he kill me? Darn it. Why do I have to speak like that? His thoughts were all over the place. Northern, in that brief moment, had been the person he always knew but had forgotten, perhaps due to familiarity. And now, he couldn't help but feel very stupid and fearful, but he still wanted to know something regardless. He fisted his hand and silently clenched it. Then he raised his head. He slowly turned to Northern but with a sheepish smile. Sir Northern, can I ask what it is exactly you're planning? Northern closed his eyes and allowed a smug grin to break out of his face. What I am planning, huh? The grin proceeded into a giggling, one that moved his shoulders. Northern stood up, a smile still plastered to his face. He stood by the wall adjacent to the mattress, facing the opposite wall. Then he summoned Dark Terror. Chapter 169. Let the games begin. The fiendish devil stood imposingly before Northern, its quartet of eyes viciously boring into his very soul. Ellis slightly raised his head to once again behold the monster's terrifying visage. He had indeed seen it before, but no matter how many times he laid eyes upon Dark Terror, the reality that Northern commanded such a formidable monster always struck him anew. How is this even feasible? He pondered to himself. How is he able to tame and control a beast of this caliber? If Northern was truly a tamer, as Ellis suspected, that meant he had defeated the monster to the brink of death to successfully subjugate it. Since taming typically involved overpowering the beast. And not all monsters were tameable. Does that mean he battled a monster like this and prevailed? He gulped. Terrifying, truly terrifying. I really should hold my tongue. Meanwhile, Northern stood before Dark Terror, hand beneath his chin, scrutinizing gaze fixed upon the monster. Name Dark Terror. True name. Singularity. Attributes. Chaos Thread. Spawn of Void. Chaos and Void. Attributes Ability. Void Flames. Darkness Embrace. Chaos Berserk. Danger Level. Devil. Soul Rank. Hellion. Soul Fragments. 14/300. Talent. Nil. Talent Class. Nil. Talent Ability. Nil. Intriguing. So all of Night Terror's attributes were indeed copied. Void must be truly remarkable. Northern inspected the floating runes before him for a couple of minutes before dismissing them. I wonder if it's because of my new talent that I can perceive his profile in such exquisite detail. He stared at Dark Terror for a long while. His eyes suddenly widened as he realized he had overlooked something crucial. Immediately, he summoned back Dark Terror's profile and began studying it intently. And there it was. Wait, what? Soul Fragments. 14/300. That makes no sense unless he would be advancing in soul rank. Wait. Can Dark Terror truly advance in soul rank? Northern felt his heart pounding with excitement and trepidation. What he knew was that monsters were incapable of rising in soul rank. They could only increase in danger level. However, seeing soul fragments on Dark Terror's profile hinted at an entirely different, thrilling possibility. Then the next detail that made his heart race was talent. Nil. Talent Ability. Nil. Is this even meant to be here? As far as Northern knew, a monster possessing talent had never been recorded. That didn't mean it was impossible for monsters to have it. Take Call, for example. He had some special skills one could classify as talents and talent abilities. But Northern didn't know if a case study on that had been conducted or if a theory had been postulated. All he knew was that a monster with talent was exceedingly rare. So if Dark Terror indeed possessed talent, then this monster could grow to be an even more invaluable ally than he had ever expected. The thought filled him with immense elation. He wanted to leap with joy. But this time he reined himself in. There was a task at hand. He recomposed his features into a serious visage. "Hey buddy, I have a task for you," he said in the monster tongue. Ellis immediately paled, eyes widening as he shrank back, pressing against the wall, legs folded in abject terror. That otherworldly utterance had filled his heart with unfathomable dread, even though he understood not a word of it. As if Dark Terror could comprehend its master, its eyes gleamed viciously for a moment before dimming. Northern, seeing this, curled a small smile and continued, "Go out of here. Be seen by people but do not harm anyone. Well, if they try to hurt you, fight back but do not kill. Your main objective is to leave this place and eradicate all the monsters. Every single beast in this entire surrounding area." The devil's menacing eyes glowed evilly again for a second, and slowly, its entire form crumbled into its shadowy embrace and streaked away. Northern smiled and looked at the curled, shaking Ellis. What is this?" The smile faded from his lips. "What ails you?" Ellis unfolded himself, panting and drenched in sweat. Slowly, he crawled to the edge of the mattress and looked at Northern. Sheer terror etched onto his face. Northern beheld the poor boy's petrified expression and grinned like a devious fiend. "Now that's more like it. But tell me, what troubles you?" Ellis couldn't bring himself to speak, even after Northern's prompting. He just stared at the white-haired man, heavy fear in his eyes. Then, after a couple of gulps, he found his voice. Slowly, he asked, "What is that language? And how are you able to speak it?" Northern scratched the back of his head and smiled sheepishly. "Oh my, I literally forgot you were here. Did you hear that?" "Of course I did," Ellis yelled, immediately shrinking back again. Northern raised his head, staring at Ellis blankly for a few seconds. "I don't know what to make of this one at all. It's like he's terrified of everything." Currently, Northern did not comprehend the effect that hearing the monster tongue had on a human. He didn't know that the language was so imbued with incorporeal power that it made one's heart shrink without reason. imbuing every fiber with inexplicable dread. It instilled an unfathomable sense of terror. That was how strange and powerful the monster tongue was. However, neither him nor anyone around yet grasped the true magnitude of it. See, disregard all of that, and prepare for what is to come. Very soon, they'll come and release us, he said sternly to Ellis, folding his arms as he continued. I want you to go back to How. I need quality swords, daggers, armors, and charms. Then you can acquire any other items you think I might desire. I'll also leave some soul cores at your disposal. You can either use them to grow or trade them. But beware, I'll expect a return on my investment when I return. Ellis's brows furrowed slightly. Where are you going? What are you plotting? Ignoring the boy's question, Northern raised his head and turned to the cell bars. First, I will start by crumbling the so-called system and order that Gilbert has constructed. Let the games begin. Chapter 170. Something Powerful, Part 1. At the outskirts of the castle, right in front of the small bridge that linked the castle region to the abandoned town, two groups stood opposite each other. The sky was getting dim and both moons carved out a crescent shape, arching against each other. This filled the entire region with an almost celestial glow. Shards of gray light illuminated the decrepit roofs of several edifices. The visage for this moment was almost iconic. Perhaps it was because even the elements of the environment themselves reckoned the beginning of the reign of a mighty being. In front of one group was a tall, slender boy with black wavy hair and emotionless eyes. He was standing opposite a brawny, brown-skinned guy with blue hair who was grinning at him. He, on the other hand, seemed to be lost in the moment. He seemed to be more in his head than present at this gathering. The brown-skinned guy folded his arms, causing his muscles to roll like cords. Arlem craned his neck a bit to behold the face of the guy standing in front of him. Ryan, then he opened his mouth. Of course, I'd have preferred a better arrangement. But we must put aside our differences and work for the betterment of the stronghold. Isn't that right, Ryan? The guy's eyes did not change. In fact, they seemed out of focus, and Arlem was left with no response, which caused some rigid veins to be seen on his forehead. A chubby guy with closed eyes then stepped forward from behind Ryan. I'm very sorry, my amiable leader Arlem. You know the kind of person Ryan is. Why not allow me to take the lead in whatever arrangements have to do with conversations? Arlem's eyes drew gray on him for a couple of seconds. Then a sharp exhale was heard, and Arlem responded. Fine. Percy, is it? Yes, Percival Beaumont. The chubby guy responded with a slight head bow. Arlem shook his head at Ryan, who was still looking blankly at him. It must be a lot to be stuck with a leader like this. Percival laughed sheepishly. Not exactly. He just communicates differently. But of course you, the amiable Arlem, are interesting in many unfathomable ways. Arlem scoffed. Ah, you guys should learn a thing or two from this guy. He gestured to his party members. Well, then Percy, let's proceed to the location for today's hunt. I don't know if this dimwit briefed you already. Did he tell you why we are having joint operations? Percival bowed a little bit. Yes. Due to the matters about the strange monster, the party leaders decided to pair up during hunts, at least until the issue is resolved. Arlem nodded his head, subscribing to what Percival had just said. Well, that's the basic info, and this is for a while. Since we are joining 2 parties and 4 groups together, it's expected that we are able to hunt down more monsters. Our party has 3 scouts. How many does yours have? Percival scratched his head sheepishly as he gave a response. 1, sir. And I suppose that's me. Arlem gave him a disapproving look for a brief moment. In that brief moment, one of Percival's slanted and small eyes slightly opened, revealing his slanted eyeball. Then he closed it back. However, for that brief moment, all of Ryan's party members standing behind Percival shivered. Luckily, Arlem's gaze changed. He wasn't the kind of dude that looked down on people because of their specialty. If anything, he knew and understood Ryan's power, even though he couldn't relate to the person or his character. If Ryan had chosen someone to be his assistant, Arlem wanted to believe he had a good reason to. Ryan was the third strongest party leader after all. Besides, something looks scary about this guy. I can't quite put my finger on it. Okay, I guess this makes things very easy for us. Why don't you share how you guys usually do your thing, and we can find a way to build our strategy around that. Percival bowed his head slightly and responded. Yes, amiable Arlem. That'd be great. Why don't we move to the planning room then? Arlem's brow drifted upward. You have a planning room? Ah, it's just a place Ryan cleared for us. We use it for planning. Ah, I see. Percival. The voice that called out the name was cold and almost lifeless, sounding like that of a lost soul in a hollow darkness. But every single person behind him turned their attention to him. Even Arlem looked at him. Summon Keto. Now. His tone was sharp and definite. Percival didn't ask any questions and instead just did as he was told. He quickly crouched and placed his hand on the ground. Multiple marks formed a circle on the ground, and two massive canines appeared out of a burst of cloud. One was black, the other was white. Both of them had a voracious glare on their faces with jagged teeth protruding from their mouths. Arlem stared with awe for a moment, but was more interested in what was going on. What could have warranted such an abrupt and hastened reaction from both of them, Ryan and Percival? Nice of you to finally. Ryan made a sharp turn, facing toward the city and commanded. Black to the west, white to the north. Immediately, the white-colored canine ran straight, disappearing into the distance in front of him, while the other dashed left, passing Arlem and his party members in a blur. Arlem was stunned with shock at the amazing speed of both creatures. For a fact, he had been shocked since he saw them appear from nothing. He didn't think a talent like that ever existed, and it just made him more curious about Percival. I guess I was right. He's a really dope guy. Arlem smiled inwardly, but he had to swallow all those thoughts and face the matter at hand. He furrowed his brows at Ryan. Will you tell me what is going on? A horde of monsters to the west. Their number is unusual. There's another horde to the north. Same thing. Percival made a small pause and continued carefully, a small sweat rolling down his cheek region. It's as though something is causing a disaster among them. Ryan looked toward the northern side where the white canine had dashed. Then he said, there is something very powerful in that area. Chapter 171. Something Powerful, Part 2. A shadowy figure with maliciously gleaming black eyes streaked through a horde of monsters, leaving a grim harvest of gore in its wake. The unseen being, a tapestry of darkness, danced and wove itself through the throng of vicious monsters. Its eyes glowed with menacing red hues, streaking along with its blurred form. Blood adorned the floor and arched through the air in every direction its visage passed. The monsters who had reigned in this region for decades were left to the graceless dance of this morbid killer. His claws were scythes of death. His jagged teeth, maws of horror and torment. Its entire form, in just a few minutes of appearance, struck primal fear into the souls of these savages, such that fighting back was no longer an option. Monsters born to be predators. Monsters that had reigned over this land as lords, threats to entire civilizations, were made to cower and flee for their lives. It mattered not their size, and there were massive sizes among them. Just as the body features of corpse eaters and night terror had changed, so too was it for any other monster. They might not increase in soul rank or number of soul cores, but their bodies became restructured, gaining enhanced physicalities. And the bodily changes were diverse and unstereotypical. For some corpse eaters they were smaller, faster, and deadlier, while others could be larger, enormous, and stronger. It was all based on each monster's individual traits, however slightly. That was how there could exist a monster over 4 meters tall, with extremely long forelimbs and smaller hindlimbs, almost quadrupedal, with no eyes whatsoever. Just a long neck and extremely long, needle-like teeth. The devil shot up into the sky, coated in black flames. Twirling in the embrace of the 2 moons, it dropped powerfully onto the monster, bringing it down with a tremendous crash. A loud clang reverberated across the entire place, causing the earth to shake tremendously. But Dark Terror seemed not to care. The monster was left with a deep, gaping hole where its supposed head had been, at the tip of its long neck. The devilish monster exuded steamy breaths from its vicious fangs, slowly turning to behold the smaller throngs of beasts with a viciously burning gaze. Before it could fully turn its gaze upon them, the corpse-eaters, even without eyes, skedaddled away, whimpering like defeated pups as they scuttled away to survival. All of them rushed in a particular direction. It was a sight to behold. Hundreds of small monsters running toward a particular direction. It was almost as if they were migrating with frightening urgency. Whereas it was just one single terror that had sown discord amongst them. The notable ones among them had been disemboweled and maimed by the devilish terror, which now stood like a harbinger of chaos, awaiting the arrival of the hero of light. Without prolonged delay, Ryan pierced forward like an arrow, coated by a powerful gale of cold wind. In the first few steps he was practically floating, but as his legs touched the ground, a cold air oozed out, and before anything could be noted or seen, Ryan was streaking forward on a thin trail of ice. His eyes were focused and squinted. Hands swung back to gather more momentum for him to speed forward. Arlem, who was behind him, smacked his teeth. TCH, show off. Suddenly, the entire ground trembled heavily, causing all of them to stop in their tracks for a moment. Ryan looked up. He had at least glimpsed the silhouette of a strange being twirling in the sky before it dropped, causing the powerful tremor. Damn, that must be it. The monster those guys were talking about. Arlem's voice came out, tinged with a soft note of, to be polite, caution. Ryan slightly turned to him and cocked his head. Scared. His one word was cold and filled with so much mockery. Even though said with his usual tone, Arlem couldn't help but feel deeply insulted by it. He grinned from ear to ear. You wish. Throwing forth a hand, a saber blade slowly materialized into it. He arrogantly placed the blade on his shoulder. A vicious grin plastered across his face. I personally can't wait to decimate that thing. Ryan looked away indifferently, his eyes subtly dimming before shooting wide open. In that moment, Percival and most of Ryan's party members quickly took cover, protecting themselves by turning away from Ryan. Light would be envious of the magnifying speed at which the boy flashed into the distance, leaving a blast of tiny ice shards that inflicted shallow injuries on several. Arlem, receiving small cuts in several areas, since he was exposing his broad chest, frowned and glared at Percival. I'm sorry, there was no time to warn. He shifted his glare toward the front, where Ryan had taken off. No problem. If he can run, then I can leap. His glare became wilder, a berserk grin on his face. Fabian, he called out. Yes, Arlem. A lean-faced man with a red-patterned bandana tied around his forehead answered quickly. His gaze was lazy but bore slight sharpness. Take care of the team, Arlem commanded. And with that, he went low, his muscles seeming to ripple and wheeze out a squeezing sound as he crouched extremely low. And like a spring, Arlem catapulted into the air, with a wild and villainous laughter. Both parties watched him soar into the distant embrace of the skies. Donned in a resplendent silver armor, Fabian stepped forward and smiled at Percival, who wore something less intimidating and more casual. His vambraces seemed exceptional, though, carved with the inscription of a snake-like dragon. And they were golden. I guess that leaves us to things, Fabian said with a soft smile, the curling of his lips making his entire face shine with noteworthy handsomeness, even with sleepy eyes and thin eyeballs. Should we just go deal with the rest of the mobs while both of them deal with whatever that thing is? We would only be a hindrance to them, wouldn't we? Percival suggested. Well spoken, my friend. With that, both parties turned in another direction and abandoned their wild leaders. Chapter 172. Something Powerful, Part 3. The devil stood gallantly, waiting for the terrifying gale that streaked toward it from afar. Dark Terror stood motionless like an onyx four-armed statue. And as the far gale slowly got closer, The redness in its eyes seemed to burn brighter. After a couple of seconds, a tremendous explosion burst out in front of it. The devil was still unmoving. In mere seconds, everywhere was encased in gigantic spikes of ice, including dark terror. Ryan slowly turned to look at the perfect work of ice art he had showcased. In just a swing of motion he had managed to slam. Arlem landed voraciously, softly shaking the ground. Has it ended before I came? Ryan turned his face toward the brown-skinned guy and turned away indifferently, slowly materializing a sharp ice cone with his gaze fixed upon the rest of the corpse-eaters that were still running for their lives. Arlem looked at him for a couple of seconds and shook his head. Really? I hate prodigies. Like many that Arlem knew, Ryan also happened to be a kid born with an outstanding talent. As if that was not enough, he turned out to be a hard-working and creative individual. Those two values gave him an overwhelming advantage to his talent. Even though Ryan was a nomad rank drifter, he could stand toe-to-toe with a master like Annette. Although if the battle got drawn out, he was bound to lose. But to be able to stand his ground with a master was impressive enough. Those darn SSS talents, Arlem cursed inwardly. Ryan was about to dash away when he suddenly stopped and slowly narrowed his eyes. Arlem was backing the humongous spikes of ice, looking fiercely at Ryan. So when the guy suddenly turned around, his brows instinctively rose. Ryan looked beyond Arlem, his eyes burrowing straight into the ice. Something was wrong. Before both of them could put their fingers on it, the entire surrounding was filled with cold, cloudy air. Arlem frowned and repositioned his blade, pointing the tip to the ground. Looks like you have slacked with your training. Ryan said nothing, but a deep frown could be seen clouding his facial features. His face contorted with a mixture of anger and confusion. Looks like you did a very poor job, Arwen. Arlem curled his lips with a jeering expression. Ryan visibly gritted his teeth, but only for a short while. His focus sank forward as seconds ticked by, and the cold air spread wider, clouding the entire surrounding. Suddenly, he narrowed his eyes and encased himself in a large shard of ice. Simultaneously, Arlem threw his saber blade over his face. Kong! A vibrating sound of metal reverberated through the desolation, clouding the space in its echoes for a few moments. They didn't catch even a glimpse of what it was, but Arlem in particular, they felt its force, such that Arlem staggered back a couple of steps, even though he did manage to defend himself successfully. He could still feel his hands stiffen from blocking that single strike. What in the world is that monster? I have never faced anything as such. When it came to pure strength, it was not a fluke to say that Arlem was the leading party leader. Of course, he lacked techniques and didn't have aesthetically amazing skills like Ryan or many others did. But when it came to brute strength and defensive skills, he was confident in his abilities. So the fact that a monster could push him back just by its attack alone petrified his entire mind. It made him freeze with fear. How? His senses questioned. For a moment, it looked like nothing made sense anymore. What is this monster? Where did it come from? What rank is it? Arlem's mind raced with many questions. But amidst it all, a wide grin slowly formed on his face. He swung his sword powerfully and stabbed it into the ground. Then he whispered,
Full armo equip.
White shards of light began to shimmer on his chest. In their embrace, the glossy blue armor with brown engravings crept across his exposed skin. As the shards of light disappeared, a sentinel was revealed, fully clad in blue armor, and a tattered cape flowing out of his epauliere. This time, I'll be ready. The freezing mist swirled thicker and thicker, making the air feel heavy and ominous. Arlem stared hard into the soupy fog, straining his eyes to catch any hint of the evil presence hiding within. Without warning, there was a deafening crack as a massive volley of jagged ice shards exploded out of the gloom. Arlem braced himself as the shards rained down like meteors against his ensorcelled armor, screeching and pounding his locked stance. One bone-rattling impact after another slammed onto his sword. This time Arlem stood his ground, powerfully resisting the pushing force of the unseen devil. In a blur of motion, he finally caught a glimpse of a slight blur. That was all he needed. With a thunderous yell, Arlem burst forward, his sword trailing brilliant streaks of light. He swung the saber blade up in a blinding arc, aiming to cut straight through the swirling fog bulging outward. For just a split second, the steel hovered at the peak of its sweep, then bounced off with a teeth-rattling clang. Arlem staggered back, his guard broken as a blinding white flare seared his vision. When he could see again, a bipedal monster stood in front of him, a grotesque fusion of onyx sinews with 4 strong hands protruding from its body. The devil opened its cavernous mouth and released a guttural roar. It reared back, its arms positioned, preparing to lunge toward Arlem. Time seemed to slow as the devil disappeared into the air, and the shadow of those obscene skewers descended toward him. Chapter 173. The Dark Terror. Time seemed to slow as the devil disappeared into the air, and the shadow of those obscene skewers descended toward him, only to be obstructed by an immense barrier of ice that flowered into existence. Ryan stepped through the frozen wall, his face twisted in cold fury as layer after layer of jagged shards spiraled from his outstretched hands. With a defiant roar of his own, he unleashed a blistering blizzard of ice that encased the beast in a tornado of glacial spikes. But the abomination barely flinched, glacial spikes bouncing off its carapace as it charged bull-like towards the 2 humans. Its massive footfalls cracked the earth itself, shaking the air with thunderous shockwaves. As its gaping maw opened wide to cleave their flesh, Ryan sidestepped, sliding on a trail of ice and blasted fresh volleys of ice from the side. The battle had well and truly begun against this black carapace demon. Arlem dug in his heels, his armored form bracing for the next onslaught as Ryan wove intricate attacks of frozen fury. Could they stand against such an ancient evil? Arlem moved on instinct, his blade a whirling cyclone of metallic light as he deflected the gruesome strike of the devil. Ryan's hands blurred in an esoteric weave, conjuring a shimmering barrier of refracting ice that tried to capture the monster. But dark terror was too fast. The devil disappeared into the shadowy embrace and streaked away. An eerie silence ensued for a while. Both drifters stood cautiously, with all their faculties of perception alerted, knowing fully well that a slight misstep could cost them their lives. The unsettling silence stretched on, the swirling mists rendering their surroundings an impenetrable veil. Arlem and Ryan stood back to back, senses straining against the deathly stillness. A faint tremor in the earth was their only warning before dark terror exploded from below in an eruption of dirt and shattered stone. Those 4 obsidian arms, tipped with wicked talons, scythed through the air, cleaving deep gouges where the 2 drifters had been standing an instant before. Arlem rolled to his feet, winged shoulder plates gouging furrows as his armored bulk slashed a path through the dense fog. He came up in a low crouch, saber leading in a defensive fighter stance as dark terror's burning crimson glare bored into him from the roiling gloom. Ryan was already counterattacking, flashing hand signs igniting frozen mandalas that spiraled outwards in refracting shards. The devil almost seemed to flow around them, its bulk and speed defying such paltry constraints of physics. Those hooked forelimbs blurred, each swipe trailing cyclonic wakes that detonated Ryan's ice constructs into powder. With a deafening roar, dark terror unleashed a focused shockwave of sonic force that staggered them both. Arlem grunted, anchoring his stance as he was driven backwards through the compacted earth. Ryan, more lightly framed, was flung bodily until he managed to ice sculpt a curved ramp to bleed off his momentum. No sooner did they rally than dark terror surged forward again, seeming to materialize directly before them. All 4 of its arms were sheathed in a spiraling plumes of black flames, a cloak of dancing flames that fragmented the very air with each devastating strike. Heek! Arlem grunted. His blade was a whirling cyclone of deflection, ringing with the percussive detonations of every parried blow. He saw openings, tried to retaliate with stabbing ripostes, but the devil was ever moving, phasing out of the material world in lurching translocation bursts. Ryan's abilities were better suited, psionic ice lances and frozen artillery splitting dark terror's shadowy form, only for the beast to reappear, reforming from the shadows as if its substance was a black smoke given flesh. We can't compete against its speed. Arlem bellowed over the tumult. We need to lock it down. Nodding grimly, Ryan braced his footing and raised both fists skyward. The young prodigy's face was a stoic mask of concentration, veins pulsing with exertion as he poured the full might of his powers into this desperate stratagem. Towering glaciers erupted around them, spiraling skyward as Ryan consolidated every remaining shard and ice crystal in the vicinity. They thickened, converging at a dizzying rate until a veritable mountain arose, all of it aimed towards containing the elusive devil within its frozen confines. Dark terror seemed to sense the deadly convergence bearing down. It turned those baleful crimson eyes towards Ryan, hurtling forward in an obsidian missile blur of lancing talons and slashing force, only to impact against Arlem's locked guard like a thunderclap. The ground quaked as the warrior's armored boots dug furrows, his saber blade ringing like a bell from the sheer ferocity of deflecting that aimed charge. For a span of straining heartbeats, Arlem held the devil's vicious onslaught at bay, his entire world narrowed to the excruciating grind of locking that lethal storm of obsidian shadow in an unyielding stalemate. Then the first Arctic tomb slammed down around them, trapping dark terror within its crystal embrace. Layer after layer followed, Ryan snarling through bloodied teeth as he subsumed the evil under hundreds of tons of ice and sub-zero pressures. When at last the young prodigy's exertions tapered off, a towering glacier entombed their foe, an icy obelisk piercing upwards into the gloom, the only indication of dark terror's entrapped presence the vague, distorted murk of its massive shape just visible within the core. Arlem staggered, his armor cracked in 1,000 places, flesh beneath mottled with savage bruising. Blood trickled from his split lip as he glared towards that frozen spire and the restrained evil it contained. That should end it, he wheezed, for once allowing his stoic mask to slip with a glimmer of cautious respect. Your powers are. He shook his head slowly. Unreal, kid. Ryan offered no response, merely sinking to his knees as the last tremors of exertion taxed his frame. For a long, pregnant pause the two warriors simply knelt in silence, depleted but victorious. Until, inevitably, there came a faint rumbling from the icy mountain's core. Both Ryan and Arlem looked up, pale faces daring to hope against hopeless truth. Blossoming cracks fissured across the glacier, growing wider and more severe as a dull red radiance seeped outwards from the epicenter. That pulsing crimson glow intensified with each passing heartbeat until all at once dark terror's shape shattered free, with surging black flames and jagged talons ripping through the confining ice in an explosion of glacial shrapnel. Liberated at last, the devil slowly trudged forward, those four baleful eyes instantly finding the humans kneeling there tired, depleted, their powers spent. And perhaps in that moment dark terror registered something almost akin to cruel respect. For it stood in front of them, motionless, as if waiting. But what they saw of this monster as its shape came before them made their faces to contort in utter horror. Whatever had ripped through that ice was no jagged talons. This monster, it was standing holding four different blades made out of black flames. Chapter 174. The Mercy of a Monster. Ah, damn. Is this the end for us? Arlem's mind shattered in sorrow. They were spent. In just a few minutes of their exchange with the monster, his physical limit had been tested multiple times. And this had caused an unnatural fatigue for him. He couldn't be more ashamed of himself even though, after all, he called himself the strongest in terms of brute force amongst the party leaders. And he couldn't stand the assault of this villainous creature. One could even say he was carried by Ryan all through, 'cause the guy was undoubtedly strong. Thinking about it made Arlem rife with anger. I can't go down like this. No, I can't. His brows furrowed, eyes slowly drifting up to apprehend the form of the creature standing before it. Even if it's the last thing I do, even if I have to use all my talent abilities and expend myself, I should see this to the end. And I still have that too. Arlem's face contorted with determination. A wild glow was subtly being illuminated in his blue eyes. And as seconds passed, they soon carried a dangerous spark in them. From behind, Ryan turned a pale face to him, watching how Arlen was struggling to stand before the monster. There was nothing he, on the other hand, could do. He had expended himself more than he should. I can't move, both physically. Any more than this will cause my flaw to activate. And talent-wise, talents were not all perfect. They worked in synchronization with the soul core. It is theorized that a talent cannot be 100% synchronized with the soul core. If it was possible, there would be no need for attributes. In a way, it could also be said that attributes exist to regulate whatever little percent of imperfection that is left in the soul core. However, it did not mean that this little imperfection is completely dealt with. While the scope and potency of this regulation is dependent on the rank of the attributes itself, should the drifter overexert themselves, the attributes could become a totally useless regulator. This is the part where flaw kicks in. Because the talent has been used to a point where its synchronization with the soul core is disturbed, it begins to seize synchronization. In that moment of seizure, a bad effect of different kinds, all in line with one's talent, is released. They are rendered incapable of using their talent until time passes, and the talent slowly and automatically resumes its synchronization process with the soul core. This bad effect is what Ryan is trying to avoid. While they had just fought Dark Terror for a couple of minutes, it had been an intense couple of minutes. The monster had stretched them far wider than they've ever been stretched in the past couple of months. If you don't move, we are going to die. The voice in his head said to him. Was it justifiable? That because of the fear of his flaw kicking in, he should give up and watch him or his comrade die. A frown slowly furrowed on Ryan's blank face. He was not going to have it. He had to fight till the end. I have to fight till the end. However, before both of them could fully rise to their feet, the terror in front of them released its weapon. All four of them slowly dissipated into thin air. The monster glared at them menacingly for a couple of seconds. A horrible grin seemed to flash across its face before it turned and walked away. Just like that. That was how these two managed to survive an encounter by Dark Terror. They were spared by the command Northern had given the devil when he summoned it. Go out of here. Be seen by people but do not harm anyone. Well, if they try to hurt you, fight back but do not kill. Your main objective is to leave this place and eradicate all the monsters. Every single monster in this entire surrounding area. In the first place, the devil was never going to kill them. But it's not like they knew about this fact. What they just saw was that a monster that was more than capable of killing them made a choice and chose to let them live. They had never seen such a thing happen. And now, the testimonies of those dudes made sense. They claimed that they met an extremely powerful monster and yet they were still alive. The party leaders didn't believe them, of course, because their testimonies made no sense. Even a fiend-rank monster, when it strikes to kill. Under no circumstances would it spare its prey. Not to speak of a monster that was as powerful as they claimed. Even though one of them was missing, there were no traces of blood or anything indicating that he was dead. It was another impossible thought that a monster would kidnap a human alive. So they were all conflicted as to what to believe. Then Braham made a discovery. At least that was what he claimed. His discovery was that this person who had gone missing could use illusions. That discovery changed everything, and since it was Braham, even though there were doubts, everyone believed. We were wrong. Arlen could now see how mistaken they were. Those guys were right. What in the world did we just face? He questioned himself. Ryan was on his knees, pearls of sweat rolling down all over his face. At the very least, he was glad his flaw didn't kick in. But things just got more dangerous. We have to report this to Lady Raven. A monster capable of making such humanly decisions. A monster that didn't fight to kill. Ryan looked at Arlen with a pallid expression. His voice trembled as he opened his mouth. Did you see that grin before it left? The remembrance of what he had seen caused a dark frown to strain Arlen's thick brows. He clicked his tongue. TSK, you are right. We need to report this. We should signal for our parties to return to the stronghold. Arlen managed to fully stand on his feet. His armor disintegrated into sparks of light as he did, revealing his brown ripped body and tight pants. Then he raised a cone-like object and wiggled it in the air. Something shot out of it and exploded into red dust in the sky. Arlem threw the cone away and gave Ryan a smug grin. "Looks like I'll be giving you a piggyback ride today." Ah, damn. Chapter 175. A good day to not die. Maintain the formation. Don't break. Swish. Wham. Slash. Slash. Perhaps it was because of the frenzy that the monsters were in, they seemed easier to kill than usual. Percival and Fabian dashed forward side by side. The former was using gauntlets. Apparently his vambraces weren't just vambraces but an enchanted rank weapon that could extend to cover his fists and serve as a formidable damage dealer. As for Fabian, he was a dual sword wielder. His strikes were light and fast. His skillfulness with the sword was beyond commendable. He moved in such fluid patterns that one could get lost in how beautiful he made combat look. The rest of the parties were also no slouches. They broke into 6 formations, 3 at the front, 3 behind, while Fabian and Percival themselves served as the spearhead of the hunt. Instead of going on the offensive like they usually would, they held a defensive line. And the reason was none other than the strange behavior of the monsters. Usually, monsters were quick to attack when they sighted humans, especially corpse eaters. They loved to hide in corners and wait for the right moment to strike. When facing them and any other monster, it was advisable to execute quick offensive attacks, aimed at incapacitating the monsters before they got the chance to strike. However, this case was different. These monsters did not look like they even cared if humans were before them. They didn't stop running. At first the group went on the offensive, but after a while Percival observed no change in the monsters' pattern. It was as if they were too freaked out about something to care that they were being slashed apart by these humans. What could they be so scared of? Just when that thought tugged his mind, a sonic sound explosion shook the air and attracted their attention. Although many couldn't dare to look away, since they were not skilled enough to ignore the rugged stampede of the corpse eaters. However, Percival and Fabian could spare a few seconds of glance, while cleaving through the monsters momentarily. It was then that something clicked in Percival's head. Whatever that was, I presume that Ryan and Mr. Arlem are facing it. Then it could be the reason why these monsters are exhibiting this pattern of behavior. They're running away for their lives. Percival then deliberated that if that was the case, pushing through a horde of desperate monsters would work to their advantage. Hence they introduced a change in strategy, and that was how they now held a defensive ground and began to easily kill these corpse eaters as they got desperate to break through and run away. One would say that in a couple of minutes, they had slain more corpse eaters than a party would on a normal occasion. On a normal occasion, without the encounter of higher danger level corpse eaters from the upper calamities. As far as they were still hazard and disaster level, it was pretty much an easy hunt. And in that kind of hunt, a party consisting of 3 teams, each team consisting of 3 individuals, would slay at least 30 corpse eaters. On better days they could slay even 50 to 60. However, the lifeless bodies of monsters, by the looks of it, seemed to have surpassed that number twofold. And no one was injured too. This was looking good. Things were proceeding better than any of them thought it would. Now all that is left is to wait for the signal from those 2. Percival thought. Then he proceeded with adrenaline boosting through his veins. This kind of better day motivated him to fight harder. His movements were more fluid, his senses sharper, and he was happy that once again, everyone might survive this battle. It was always a battle of uncertainty each time they set out to kill. As a scout, he carried the responsibilities of dear lives. He had to search for routes that held less dangerous monsters, and should an anomaly occur due to his miscalculation or what he never even envisioned, and lives were lost, Percival took the blame upon himself more than anyone would. This apocalyptic continent, over the past few months, had taught him what it meant to be a scout, the weight it carried and how painful it could be. Hence, every time they set out, Percival's only wish was that they all come back with the same number they left with. But it wasn't like his wish was always fulfilled every time. However, this time at the very least, it seemed like it would be fulfilled. So Percival fought with so much joy flooding his veins and fueling his power. However, their moment was cut short. Suddenly all the monsters froze, and began to shiver. They all were headed towards a particular direction but froze, turned and dashed away in different directions. With more speed and vile fury, they shot into different angles, crudely attacking anything or anyone that stood in their ways. Everything happened so fast that, in mere beats, the entire space that was teeming with crowds of monsters just moments ago was completely barren. Everywhere was dry, only the drifters who stood, dumbfounded and panting. What in the world just happened? The place was filled with so much deafening silence that Fabian's mutters could be heard clearly by everyone around. Percival turned to the direction the monsters were initially running towards and opened his tiny eyes a little bit. He did not know when his lips parted tremblingly. There's something coming. He couldn't shake it off. The cold fear that gripped him made his entire body freeze in motion. Perhaps this was what it felt like. The other part of fight or flight that rarely gets talked about. Freeze. Still, others couldn't tell yet. Since they were not as perceptive as he was, they couldn't tell that a monster was slowly approaching them, while taking its time to decimate the corpse-eaters it met on its way. "Hey, see!" One of them pointed to the sky, to the red cloud of dust that was slowly dissipating. "Percival!" Fabian called, keenly observing the stocky scout backing them. "That's our cue to leave. How do we move all these bodies? Run!" "Huh!" His voice was hoarse and inaudible at first, clogged by the thick tension of fear that churned his insides, so Fabian couldn't hear clearly what Percival was trying to say. "Hey, what's wrong with you?" Before he could finish his statement, Percival made a savage, sharp turn, his face pale and rife with horror, his tiny eyes wide opened as he shouted at the very top of his throat. "Ruanen!" They didn't need an extra confirmation, because even as Percival ran towards them, a humanoid, four-armed creature was also hurtling towards them. Northern, since the moment he sent Dark Terror out, sat cross-legged with his eyes closed up until now. However, there was one moment when he opened one of his eyes. "Do you want to copy Talent Frostheart? SSS, class? For 5,000 talent fragments." Both eyes grew wider. "You do not have enough talent fragments." Crap, crap, crap. What the hell was that? Who in this damned place has an SSS class talent? And why is it worth 5,000 talent pieces? Chapter 176. Talk about a bad day. The castle was in an uproar. A couple of minutes ago, Arlem entered with Ryan on his back. Both of them didn't look so good. The sky was dimly lit and the night had held strong in the atmosphere. The main hall was already filled with people in array waiting for the return of the hunters. However, only Arlem and Ryan returned. With no meat, chatters began to rise. "What's going on? I don't see any of their party members. Oh, bless Tatch. Did they all get wiped out? Why are they looking like that? Where is our meat? Is there no food for us tonight?" The air was rife with mutters like this. Everyone was looking at Arlem and Ryan, who were immediately approached by other party members and two party leaders. They were escorted into the inner chambers before anything could be said. And now a bunch of beaten, crap-looking mongrels, looking like godforsaken peasants who have no hope left in the world, were walking towards the castle with their heads down. The people in the outskirts watched from the sidelines, wondering in silent curiosity, what could have gone wrong? There were no meat. Usually, these people would be dragging a bunch of corpse eaters on a makeshift cartwheel, some other times 2 or 3 cartwheels. However, they didn't even have one following them from behind. Talk about a bad day. Some of them hissed and walked away from the sidelines. Although both parties had pale and rough expressions etched on their faces, they weren't bothered by the disappointment felt by the people. Being able to live through this encounter was enough to be grateful for. If the people were so hungry, then let them pick up weapons and go hunt for themselves. They were greeted with tense expressions by the guards, who silently opened the door for them to enter the main hall. Although curiosity wafted across their faces heavily, none of them uttered a word and just watched in silence. Many would have already guessed the situation. Even if others didn't know, it was clear that this was another bad hunting day. But this was much worse. Or maybe better. It was hard to choose. They didn't come back with any monster corpses. Nothing at all. Even on days when hunting was very bad, days when the parties came back with 1 or 2 fallen drifters, they always came back with monster corpses. This time around, they may not have come with fallen drifters, but they also didn't come with monster corpses. No dinner for all. It was very unsettling and left a bad taste in their mouths. Sage Gilbert had commanded that you all head to the meeting hall immediately and not engage in any conversation with anyone. One of the guards at the door said to them. Fabian nodded with a solemn expression and led the rest forward. Even though the mumbling of the people grew louder, they pressed forward silently and tried their best not to pay attention to anyone or anything. They couldn't even if they wanted to. The experience with that devil was still fresh in their heads. After a couple of steps, the massive door to the meeting hall swung open and they were all directed inside. It was not every time ordinary party members got to be in this meeting hall with other prestigious leaders. Even though it was a tense atmosphere, it was still a grand and envious opportunity. Well, for those who had time to think of it that way. There was a long table with seats at the center of the hall. But majority of the party leaders were not sitting. On one side, Ryan lay, encased by a cage of vines that was subtly emitting a green glow. A green-haired guy in a casual white shirt and black trousers was crouching beside him. Immediately they entered. The eyes of all the party leaders drifted towards them. In a brief, unaccounted second, it felt like the weight of the entire world was about to come crashing down on them. Their shoulders shuddered visibly. Then Sage Gilbert spoke with his arms folded. I'll have you guys explain what exactly happened. His voice was so thick and stern that it made their hearts heavy with fear. Fabian looked at Percival with a drop of sweat rolling down from his temple. The latter also gave the same look. Then both of them stepped forward. Percival inhaled deeply and started. When we set out, Ryan detected a strange presence ahead of us. As a result, I used my ability to scout the area. After discovering the locations of the threat, Ryan decided to go for the greater threat while we handled the rest. Fabian took over as Percival paused to catch his breath. We encountered monsters, corpse eaters. Their movement was erratic and strange. They were running from something, which made it quite easy for us to kill them. He looked at Percival, both of their faces heavy with tension. Will someone talk, or do y'all want me to beat it out of y'all? A raspy, hoarse voice rang out harshly from amongst the party leaders. It was the guy with shark-like teeth. Well, after a while, it came for us. The words hurried out of Fabian's mouth. With a bead of sweat, Percival shook his head and quickly interrupted. No, I don't think that was it. Fabian looked at him. What do you mean? Didn't you see that thing chase us? Percival furrowed his brows in strained tension. He slowly shook his head as he opened his mouth again. It did come, but it didn't come for us. I think it came for the corpse eaters. He raised his head to the party leaders and added with a firm tone. If it was coming for us, we wouldn't be here right now. Sage Gilbert sighed, closing his eyes for a moment and opening them. Your report is in line with what Arlem had said. Apparently the monster spared he and Ryan too. And this becomes coherent with what those guys had said. Sage Gilbert was silent for a couple of seconds, causing the hall to be ridden with a grave, torturous silence. Just when patience was running thin, his voice cut through. And I never wanted to admit to this, but I also have a report of my own, where they managed to escape. However, this ties to Northern, the new drifter. Graham's face darkened and he stood up, clenching his fists. Raven looked at Sage Gilbert. You never told us this before? I was observing. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. But now that things are like this, I have no choice. Raven's eyes went out of focus for a second. So this was what he was talking about? She thought as she remembered Northern's words. Then she stared at Sage Gilbert with grim seriousness. I don't like that you were being dishonest with us. Sage Gilbert looked at her silently for a couple of seconds. Those seconds, however, were seconds of burdensome tension on everyone. Then he let out a sigh and said, I'm sorry. I should have told you guys sooner. Given the situation, our link is this Northern, considering that your report is related to him. And one of the witnesses was found with him. I suggest we bring him in for interrogation. Terence suggested. Sage Gilbert nodded. You are right, Lady Terence, we should. He looked straight at the guards. Bring the prisoner with white hair here, he commanded. Chapter 177. The Interrogation, Part 1. Northern sat on the mattress cross-legged. Ellis had leaned against the wall and was already fast asleep. Snoring, in fact. Northern spared a fleeting glance and wondered. How can he even sleep comfortably in a place like this? He sighed and looked down. He was plagued by something different entirely. Apart from not being able to catch a wink of sleep. Something bothered him strongly. And it was what he had seen before. 5,000 talent fragments? Truth be told, Northern had never thought about such a magnanimous amount. TSK, he had never even thought about what came next after this rank. And right now, he was realizing that he had been too lenient with a lot of things. I should be growing at a rapid rate. If Raven could become a master within the period they had, then he could have done better. He could have handled things better, maybe even become a drifter while he was in the rift. Although Ellis had said that it was impossible for walkers to become drifters while inside a rift, they needed to come out of the rift first. But Northern doubted if that would have been the case for him. He was of a different breed after all, a drifter with no soul cores. I guess I really messed up, huh? If I had become a drifter while in the gate, I probably would almost be a nomad by now. Northern ground his teeth hard. It was a mistake. A very stupid and annoying mistake. And seeing how strong others around him had now become, Northern couldn't help but hate himself. He let out a deep exhalation. There's no use sulking about it. What I should do now is hasten the pace of my growth. I have been too lenient with things. But as things are right now, I want to evolve Soul Eyes, see its upgraded capability and also focus on grinding for talents. Northern was silent for a couple of seconds. My clones? No. While the clones looked like the best option, Northern had to remember that they were bounded to him by distance. Of course, there was a miraculous case where a clone of his managed to live for a while after he was captured, however. Till today he didn't know how or what had happened. But he did know that a crucial facilitator of that was the immense amount of soul essence he had. Now, he didn't have that much. He didn't even have as much as he operated on soul essence. There was no telling if it would work. I guess we'll just try things out and see how it turns out. Northern slowly opened his eyes. Oh, it's time already? The ghost of a grin left its fleeting trace on the corner of his lips. A couple of seconds later, footsteps began to echo into the passage. Then minutes later, two men arrived at the dungeon cell. They were donned in leather armor. The colors of their vambraces, pauldrons, and helmets were distinctively apart, which made what they wore look like a makeshift armor, but it was slightly better. Clang, clang. They hit the cell bars with their spears, causing Ellis to jolt awake. Huh? Huh? Are we dead yet? Northern looked at him in palpable disgust. You are who will die. I am not dying in this place, and neither are you because I have to collect my items. Hey, shut up. White-haired boy, come out. Northern glared at them. Will you look at these bastards? He sneered for a moment. Then he calmed himself with 2 deep breaths and stood up. Ellis, hold the forte tight. I will be back soon. Yes, sir. He had responded before he realized what he had just responded to. At once he shouted back as the guards opened the iron bars for Northern. Hey, what do you mean? This is not our house. You should work on getting me out of here, not coming back. Northern ignored him and stepped out of the cell. Your hands, the guards requested. Before putting both hands forward, Northern looked at both of them one after the other and stated, if I told you that putting me in shackles is totally useless, I'd still kill you both if I wanted to escape this place, would you believe me? One of the guards frowned. He was wearing an absurd-looking winged helmet and his face was too stony for him to be a student. I guess he's a native. Shut your mouth and bring your hands. He yelled and yanked the shackles onto Northern's hands. Northern watched them, silently muttering. There's really no need for all this. It changes nothing. Regardless, he was taken in the middle and escorted away. Ellis could only stare in worry and longing, holding the iron bars and wondering, I hope I have not caused trouble for him. Northern was, after all, in all this mess because of him. Maybe, if I had not involved him, things would have been better. For him. Ellis tightened his grip around the iron bar and slowly dropped his head. Northern found himself standing in this hall he had been in once before. It was not particularly enticing. The place was worn out. The chandeliers still hung strong from the ceiling but were rusted and had lost their beauty. The windows were covered with veils, although it made no difference since the night was already thick. Northern was standing in front of the large table, confronted by 13 party leaders. Some group of people with tense faces and shuddering shoulders were standing to the side. A few seconds of grave silence passed. Nobody said anything, and he just stood there, staring in utter silence while observing their faces. There was Raven. That face vexed him to the bone. There was Annette. She had been a great help, but he couldn't, because of that, be complacent. Nothing changes the fact that she's amongst their ranks. Although I think she's being sneaky. Is she planning to clear a rift on her own? There were the twins. In Northern's opinion, they've grown to look even more deadly than a viper. Perhaps more like a taipan. I guess they too have changed from the ordeals faced on this continent. Then there was Sage Gilbert, the white-haired girl with golden eyes, Terence, whom he was going to start with. I will make sure to check the talent of every single person here, starting with the lie detector. Chapter 178. The Interrogation Part 2. Name, Terence Lucasa. True name, Daughter of Ul. Attributes, soul connection, soul sense, soul rank, nomad, soul core saturation, high, talent, the oracle, talent class, S, talent ability, foresight, incredible, but I don't see any lie detecting ability here. Northern, is it? Sage Gilbert's thick voice rolled through the dark air. Northern immediately raised his head with a little frown when he heard his voice and responded. Yes, Headmaster Gilbert. We have a couple of questions for you. Can you comply? Northern drifted up a brow and scoffed a fraction of a second later. He shook his head with a reminiscence of the scoff as he responded. I know you did not just ask me that question, because if I truly had a choice, I wouldn't be in these chains, escorted here without care for my consent. Lifting his chin a little bit, he sneered with a menacing grin. How nice of you to ask now. Gilbert closed his eyes tiredly and opened them all in a second. It seems, Northern, that politeness does not seem to work with you. Northern chuckled. Ah, right. Yes, me and politeness do not go hand in hand. Especially when that politeness is coming from shady people like you. The hall was filled with a small chatter. But it was nothing to be worried about, until the green-haired drifter in casual wear sprang to his feet, banging the table. How dare you speak to a sage like that? Braham shouted. Northern cocked his head with a terrifying glare. Will you look at this nut job? Braham gritted his teeth, almost gnashing. What? What did you just call me? Northern moved his hands to pick his nose, causing the shackles on them to make a clap in the solemn silence. I said nut job. Do you want to know the meaning? It's an extremely rare word for special cases of people whose brain is in their nuts. Do you want to know what I refer to when I say NUT? You bastard. Insolence, you peasant. How dare you? Braham growled, his face beginning to get all red. Look at you, like that matters in this desolation. Sorry, Mr. Noble. I hope your noble rank has helped you live thus far. If it has, I do hope it will continue to. With me around, that is. He allowed that menacing grin again. Sage Gilbert. Can you hear that? That's a death threat. He's threatening me. Sage Gilbert closed his eyes and let out a sigh, then commanded. Stop, Bram, and sit down. Braham furrowed his brows so tightly and glared at Northern, seething with red-hot anger before he plumped back to his seat. Raven raised her hand and looked at Gilbert. Can I say something? Sure. A drop of sweat seemed to drop from Gilbert's cheek immediately after she spoke. Or maybe it wasn't. Raven stood up regardless and removed herself from between the chair and table. She began walking towards Northern. Her frame was lithe and petite. The sleek curves around her hips gave her a flawless body structure. She was almost like an unrealistic model. Even with the sleek metallic armor she was donned in, all of her body features still managed to excel. It was rare and captivating. She stopped in front of Northern, who may have been dazed for a second but had long snapped out of it. He frowned and looked down at her. What? Why is she standing so close? Then she held his hand, leaned a little on her toes to whisper this into his ear. Listen carefully, Lael. I don't know what's going on, but it's really delaying our plans. Can you please just cooperate with them, so we can leave as soon as possible? She withdrew her head and looked into his eyes, walking closer to him and muttering inaudibly. Or do you not want to go home? Hearing those words filled Northern with hope again. His frown slowly began to shatter. He looked away and responded. Fine. I've heard. You. Eh? Everyone expressed the same silent shock at the same time and couldn't help but wonder. What could she have said to him? Because in just an instant, Northern's entire mien seemed to change, and she elegantly returned to her seat and nodded to Sage Gilbert. Northern glared at her from where he stood. It's annoying. It's annoying. So annoying. Something about her is annoying me so much. Crap. Damn. So Northern, we brought you here to ask you a couple of questions actually. First of all, how do you know Eric? Why are you here with him? While Sage Gilbert was talking, Northern took a look at the guy sitting closer to him. Name, Erickson Weatherby. True name, Mindless. Attributes, Genius Intellect. Soul rank, Nomad. Soul core saturation, Low. Talent, Intellectual Enigma. Talent class, SS. Talent ability, Mnemonic Mastery. Wow, he's impressive. A genius? And an SS rank talent? Who in the hell gathered these people here? It seems like this is where all the good stuff is. Northern. He quickly raised his head. Ah, sorry. So you were asking how I know Ellis, right? He paused, breathed, and continued. Well, there's not much story to it. I needed a person that was good at selling stuff and had an eye for items. He was the perfect one for me, and I grabbed him. Gilbert looked at Terence, who in response nodded. There it is again, that darned lie-detecting ability. But where is it? I can't find it on her profile. It was frustrating. I see. So, what were the two of you doing here? Northern stared straight into Gilbert's eyes. What else? We came to trade some items. His answer was definite. With this lie detector lady, it's going to be pretty hard for me to deny the things about Dark Terror. Do I even know if she's really a lie detector or if she's just faking it to trick me? He paused inwardly. Ah, crap. Why did I never consider that possibility? Will you look at me? He grinned inwardly. Let's see. All right then. The next question we'd like to ask you. His voice went low for half of a second, then came back up. There's been an incident of a monster within the castle. Before I say anything about it, I'd like to ask you, have you ever come across any weird monster? One with an irregular behavior such as sparing its prey. Northern raised a brow, his face was blank for a moment. Yes. Immediately, Terence shot up, her eyes widening and trembling. There's a fluctuation. But what is this? It's like this guy has no soul essence. I didn't notice it before because he didn't lie. What is this darkness that I'm feeling? Gilbert looked at Terence for a couple of beats. The young oracle was incredibly tense and strained, as if she had just met her nemesis. Lady Terence? He called out softly to her. He's lying. All the party leaders turned their faces to Northern with different kinds of frowns etched upon them. Meanwhile, Northern grinned internally. So it was not fake after all. Chapter 179. The Interrogation Part 3. At first, Gilbert found himself conflicted. Why would he lie about coming across any monster with weird behavior since leaving the gate? Something felt off. Gilbert wanted to believe that Northern was not lying about anything. But the fact that Terence deduced his answer to be a lie left him conflicted. So he had no choice but to believe his lie detector, for now. He removed his gaze from Terence and focused on Northern with a stern look plastered on his face. Why would you lie about meeting a monster that is weird? Do you think we are here to joke? His voice was growing sharp and thicker. Northern, undisturbed by the thickness and sharpness, slowly shook his head. It's not like that. I have come across something weird, but it's in the gate. As he responded, he looked at Terence as Sage Gilbert also did the same. She nodded and slowly reclined to her seat, nodding her head. Ah, so that's how this is. In this short moment, Northern had been able to quickly deduce a couple of things. It was simple, while Terence's ability or whatever it is worked to detect lies, but it seemed like it was not a perfect lie detector. And Northern didn't know if he could call that an ability. Perhaps it was a kind of trick only she could pick up on. Because Gilbert's answer was definite, and his response was correct. He had indeed seen a weird monster, but he had never seen a monster that would spare one's life. Not inside the rift, not outside. While Night Terror was a very close example of this kind of monster. Night Terror did not behave too far-fetched than any other monster would. But based on his opinion alone, Night Terror was a very perfect example of this kind of monster. There was his truth, there was a general truth. The general truth is the presence of a monster that spares people instead of killing them. His truth was that Night Terror, the weird monster he encountered, didn't spare him. Even though it didn't kill him, it made his life a living hell. And in the end, was bound to kill him. These little discrepancies caused a fragment of inconsistency in both truths. And the moment he said yes, that inconsistency was discovered to be a lie. Which means, she really has a trick, and it's not a talent ability. It could even be something related to her attribute. It was difficult to tell. But at the very least, Northern was certain. Another reason was that the moment he revealed his truth became a general truth and therefore was designated as the truth. Which means whatever trick Terence was using to discover lies is trash. Trash of the trash. While it seemed good on the outside, it can be tricked easily by someone who is smart. Even Northern, who wasn't very smart, was able to detect its flaw in one go. I'm sure this guy Erickson would have known the flaw in it already. Northern's eyes went to Eric for a moment. The timid boy shuddered the moment their eyes met and looked away. There's a case about a strange monster that attacks but does not kill. It did severely injure someone, but the person is alive. What baffles me now, however, is the recent testimony. The monster was fought by two party leaders. They were defeated, and it still walked away without killing them. This act alone contradicts millennia of experiences and studies about monsters. He paused to stare intensively at Northern, then continued, "The entire safety of the stronghold depends on this. Please, if you know anything about this monster, help us." A smile eerily crept onto Northern's lips. Then his lips slowly ejected the words, "Why should I?" Gilbert sighed and looked down, almost as if he was expecting that response. Northern looked at all of them, then lastly settled his gaze on Gilbert. "I owe you nothing, you owe me nothing. If anything, I should be pissed for being arrested when I have done nothing wrong. I have never posed any sort of danger to your stronghold. If anything, I want it to be totally free of danger." Now that was another general truth. But his own truth could not be read until it is said. While his true intent is to cause discord in the stronghold by having the Dark Terror eliminate all the monsters around the castle. He was also, in that action, ridding the people of every danger. But by killing all the monsters, the safe system that Gilbert and the party leaders had constructed to make the people obey and submit to them will crumble. However, that was, in this scenario, his truth. And he had no intention of saying it out. Gilbert looked at Terence, who nodded, and Northern was watching that happen, proud of his deductions and the fact that they were frighteningly true. He grinned internally. "Okay, I know you have true intentions for the stronghold. Will you be willing to help us with this situation? Even if it is for a price?" Gilbert asked. I'm sure there's something he wants to get out of this situation. He's just a fox after all, Gilbert said internally. Meanwhile, his question was left hanging in the air for a couple of seconds. Northern did not say anything, and everyone was staring in tense silence. At last, the young white-haired drifter opened his mouth and gave his response. No. Northern's response caused a moment of stunning shock to waft through the atmosphere of the hall. All of them glared at him with different kinds of anger. Graham, especially, was so furious. His face was red, his veins were looking like they were going to burst out of his head. Even Gilbert could not understand why Northern was refusing. After all, they were offering to give him a price for it. Why? I said I was going to give you a price, didn't I? Northern shook his head. It doesn't matter. I don't know if I can defeat the monster in a battle. Why should I jeopardize myself to help you? He breathed and continued. Also, there's nothing you guys can offer me. Then he stretched forward his shackled hands. Take these shackles away from my hands, or I will break them myself. Gilbert frowned. There's more. You have only answered to one. Don't get too pompous about yourself. Northern's brows drifted towards each other a little. He could tell. Ah. I guess this is where the hard part comes. Why was Ellis Ruthsworn with you? I already told you we came to get items together. Not that. Gilbert interrupted fiercely. Ah. This is beginning to get really annoying. He just shouted at me. Didn't he? Northern's brows were now beginning to furrow darkly. Ellis Ruthsworn was not in this castle for 3 days. Where has he been? Northern raised a brow. Shouldn't that be obvious? He was at my place. Why? I stumbled upon him while I was hunting the area for monsters. He begged me that he had nowhere to go, and I had no intention to let him go. But after discovering what a gem he is, I decided to let him stay with me while I use him to achieve my goal. Gilbert looked at Terence, who responded, He's telling the truth. He moved his gaze back to Northern, squinting his eyes as his next set of questions rang out. What is this gem you are talking about? What goal did you use him to achieve? Northern jerked his head back a little. Hey, now that's a boundary you shouldn't be crossing. I mean, this is my business and is totally unrelated to the monster in any way. He gestured with the clanging of his shackles. Ellis and the monster matter are none of my cup of tea. Ellis's usefulness to me is also none of your concern. And you definitely do not expect me to just tell you how useful a drifter he is. It's all your fault for not discovering that. Gilbert leaned back into his chair and folded his arms. Silence ensued for a while. Then Raven raised her hand slightly. Can I ask him a question? Northern's gaze rose, revealing skepticism in the tilt of his eyebrows. What is this girl doing? What does she think she is doing? Why does she want to ask me a question? Based on what Raven had said to him, he thought she was his silent ally in this gathering. But now, he couldn't help but feel like he was foolish and mistaken to think that. Because, why in the world is she standing up to ask him a question? Oblivious to his thoughts, she stood up and looked at him, her eyes giving away not even the subtlest of emotion. That cold look of hers made shivers run down Northern's spine. He had been doing well so far, but now he couldn't help but feel like everything was about to crumble with whatever she was going to utter. Raven looked at him in silence for a few seconds. Then she asked, Do you know this monster that we speak of? Have you ever met with it? Oh damn, crap. Chapter 180. Know your place, you drifter. Northern stood silently for a couple of seconds. He was staring at Raven as she was at him too, keenly. The most annoying thing to him was that he couldn't get a reading on what exactly she was playing at. I thought she was on my side? But he also had to understand that Raven was in the dark as much as everyone else was. Perhaps, she truly thought that Northern had no ties to this monster and so wanted to end this interrogation in just one go. That's right. Or she could be plotting something really sneaky which is getting on my nerves. While the latter thought seemed plausible, Northern didn't feel like that was the case. He couldn't read her indeed, but he had a feeling like she was just honestly trying to end the interrogation. Because, Who really would have thought that a human had the ability to command such a terrifying monstrosity? Either way, Northern had to give a response soon because his delayed response was beginning to send different messages to the party leaders. They all observed him with suspicions inscribed on their faces. Ah, well yes, I have met it, too. Sage Gilbert locked his fingers and leaned his chin barely on them. His eyes were shooting lasers into Northern's soul. But I didn't even fight it. Sage Gilbert looked at Terence. He's telling the truth, she whispered to him. Northern, of course, knew what he was doing. The question was straightforward and needed a straightforward answer. Since he had gotten a hang of how Terence's lie-detecting ability or whatever it was worked, he knew that he just needed to give a correct answer. He didn't need to spill the entire circumstances surrounding the whole situation and therefore, that way, he wouldn't be revealing any secret of his. How? When? What happened? Can you tell us all of it? Give us a report. Gilbert demanded hastily. Like I'm a part of your group? No, I don't owe you any report, and I think I have answered your questions enough. Please get these chains away from my hands. Gilbert stared at him intensely for a few seconds. I don't want to say anything. Headmaster, I think it's enough now. Annette finally put in. Me too. I think he has proven himself more than enough already. He has no obligation tied to us. Raven also added, which shocked Annette for a fraction of a second. She looked up at the young lady with one drifting brow. Gilbert exhaled and unlinked his hands, then leaned back into the chair. Fine then, I will let you go. But I have no intention to release Ellis Ruthsworn. He owes us a report since he is a member of the castle. Northern nodded in agreement. I see, that's okay. But know that I have signed a contract with him. If he tells any of you my secrets, I'm going to kill him. Gilbert suddenly rose, his eyes gleaming with a fearsome orange light. The entire atmosphere shuddered. He slowly placed his hand on the table, but in an instant, the table disintegrated into shards, shooting away with a blinding force. The party leaders didn't even have the time to react before all this happened. In their eyes, the table was there one moment and gone the next. And yet no one was injured, not even a scratch. Northern felt his heart drop from his chest. His spit became dry, and it became somewhat hard to breathe. But his gaze did not waver from the image of the terrifying man in front of him. He made sure of that. And he had talented eyes to keep up, which was why he was able to perfectly discern Gilbert's movement, even when others couldn't. In the blink of an eye, the man split through the air and appeared in front of him, pointing a finger at his forehead. Headmaster! Annette shouted in that instance. The twins were also already on their feet, sweating buckets. Gilbert paused and turned his head halfway back. His few actions had caused the entire atmosphere to be torn by a different and powerful tension. Northern himself could tell the difference. I guess this is how far my arrogance can take me. Not that he didn't understand the magnifying line between him and Gilbert. He just didn't like this man, and others didn't know why. One more. Gilbert's voice rang out gently, which was quite concerning considering the magnitude of tension that folded the atmosphere. One more from you, and I will show you the difference between us. Northern glared into the man's eyes. Several balls of sweat formed on his face and froze there. His eyes glimmered with a subtle blue glow, and his cheeks were trembling as he tried to smile. He couldn't deny the fear that crawled through his spine with cold feet. His palms were wet, and his legs were trembling. But his eyes didn't waver from the sage's. Gilbert looked at him for a few more heartbeats and expelled a heavy breath. Immediately, the entire atmosphere loosened. It was as if the air that was being trapped in some sort of invisible jar suddenly escaped and refreshed the entire space. Leave. We will send Ellis Ruthsworn to you when we are done with him. Remove his chains. He commanded and turned away from Northern. Northern stood, frozen in silence. He didn't say anything and just watched with a frown as the guys that brought him removed his chains. Then they escorted him outside the hall. Immediately he got outside the hall, however, he fell. Northern felt the strength in his legs sap away at a horrifying speed. He leaned his entire weight on his hands while he knelt. What is wrong with you? They wouldn't ever understand. They were outside after all. Terrifying, truly terrifying, Northern muttered to himself. Once again, he was made to remember the vast difference between him and several other drifters. Crap, I need to get stronger. I really need to get stronger. If he was getting complacent because of his past results, it all stopped now. From this moment, he couldn't afford to be nonchalant and passive about growth. Because so far, that's exactly what he has been doing. If you want access to fast updates or the full novel in high-quality audio, contact me now and buy. I offer over 300 complete audiobooks from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, and more. No locked episodes, no subscriptions, just one-time payment via PayPal or Ko-fi. Message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out the full list of available novels on Discord. Start listening to your next favorite audiobook today.